Okay, everybody, welcome back to Ending the Stigma, a path to recovery. I'm your host, Fredd Carroll, back from vacation, along with my co host, life coach, author of the new book, Opioid Epidemic. We'll talk about that later. Now available on Amazon, Scott H Silverman. So our phone line is open 888-261-2220. Call us to discuss your issues or your successes. We'll discuss anything at this point. Anything you want to talk about, we're here to talk about, I guess. I mean, sounds good to me, but so how are you, Scott? Did you miss me?
It's interesting. I was going last week after I worked on with Tim, right? I was going through withdrawals, so I had to call my sponsor and say, "Hey, I'm missing Fredd. What do I do?" They go, "Man up and go to a meeting and talk about it."
That's right. Man up. Make sure you man up.
Person up. Sorry, I'm in California. Person up.
Yeah. So I wanted to tell you real quick before we'll go into little details on my vacation and stuff, but I wanted to bounce this off you. It's a dilemma I'm having between truthfulness and being the best possible father I can be at the same time. So it's one of those things where I'd be forced to either, not forced, but I have to make a decision whether to assist in helping somebody, knowing that it's not going to work, that it's going to fail already because I have too much history with the person, and satisfying my children at the same, one or the other. So what we're running into is an ex that has some issues, mostly mental health more than they were drug addiction issues, but she seems to be cleaner, I guess is the term I could use. I don't know. We don't really know, but she seems okay. But her mental health is off, and my kids have asked me to get involved and reach out to her to let her know that I am not against all these things that I've already tried in my life. But my kids seem to think this is something that needs to be done. So I think you understand this, where I am, even though you've always been in a marriage that was solid, but not, you haven't been divorced or anything. You don't have an ex-wife. So it is a challenge and I guess the easy way to say this is I'm going to have to just help and let them see what happens when you do try to help her.
Okay, now you've given us an interesting scenario with some unpainted corners. So what is the actual situation right now? And this is your ex-wife, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so this is the mother of your children, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so be a little more specific about what, if you can, what the actual issue is.
Well, personally, I don't know what it is. I don't have anything to do with this woman, and she didn't have.
So what's the issue? Is the issue with your child about her mother, their mother, or is the issue about what it is your child thinks you should do with your ex? What's the issue? Who's it with? Let me start there.
Well, so the main issues with my ex-wife, who has never been a parent, to the children. I've always had custody.
Okay.
And she wasn't in their life at all, even though she lives right down the street. And she got in a lot of trouble between drugs, alcohol specifically, promiscuous, all that stuff. But then she took a downward spiral, went into a suicide attempt, and went away. She's been in jail. Everything about, her life, and she hasn't worked. So that's been a big thing. So like I said, when we went down to Florida, the reason was to see her mother, who is not doing well health-wise, and my daughter wanted to see her grandmother. So I was told I wasn't allowed to be there by my ex-wife. But my brother-in-law is down there. I call him my brother-in-law still. And he had no problem with me being there, and I went to dinner with her. So I'm not going to drive all the way to Florida to sit in my car in a parking lot in an elderly housing while my daughter visits her. So this is where it all came to light. Was my daughter figured, she'd like to try to save her mother. Now you gotta realize she's young and she's never has any experience with her mother. So she just wants her mother, which is fine. That's everybody has that. She loves her mother. But she wants me to reach out to her mother and tell her I'm not against her. I'm not, because she has this delusion. She's very delusional in her thoughts. She thinks I have people following her. She thinks all these things, and she's mentally unstable from that standpoint. She hasn't worked in 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
All she does is sit in bed all day long. Now, her problems were pills and heroin, and now she's so, the doctors have her so pilled up with her depressions and all this. So the biggest dilemma I'm having is I already know it's a waste of time. Now, is it a waste of time, even if it fails? That's what I'm asking you.
Okay, so the question is, I think what I'm hearing is your daughter wants you to talk to your ex, and to what end? Because your daughter has heard from her mom that she's concerned about how you feel about her, or is this in your daughter's? Okay.
My daughter think that plays a role.
Okay. So when's the last time you spoke to your ex?
When she tried to kill herself and I kicked the door down and saved her life.
How long ago was that?
2.5 years ago.
Okay. So is your dilemma, or no, I don't want to guess what it is. Tell me, what is your dilemma? Is it you don't want to talk to her? You don't want to disappoint your daughter? You're not sure which way to go? Got to help me.
The dilemma is I already know it's a failure.
What's a failure?
That reaching out to her and trying to help her is not going to get anybody. I've done it 10 times already.
Well, what would happen if you just reached out to her and said hi and just listened?
I don't know. I've never done. I didn't do that in the marriage, obviously, either. So
well, but now you've turned into a fluff muffin since we've known each other. So here's the thing. Obviously we could go on with this, but and sometimes things happen in phases. So my suggestion would be, since your daughter wants you to reach out to her mom, your ex, why don't you simply do that? Just go, hi, how are you? I just wanted to say hello and check in, and then just be quiet.
Yeah, it's definitely, that's probably what I'm going to end up doing. But I figured
a couple things might happen with that, Fred. Number one, your daughter's going to be hopefully appreciative that you've done that. Hopefully. Secondly, your ex may say something you've never heard before, and with that listening opportunity, you may be able to swing back around with a follow-up call after you've had a chance to process it. And maybe if she says, look, somewhere in the call, she may say, I need help. She may say, I don't know why you're bothering me. I'll see you later, and hang up. I mean, the thing is, you can only handle your side of the street up to a certain point. But if your daughter is putting some, pressure on you, or just really wants you to do it, make the call. I mean, what's the worst that can happen is you listen and you hear something, and who knows, maybe, just maybe, she's ready for some help and she's ready to reach out.
Yeah.
And if nothing else, if she's in one of her, in between modes or moods, and she blows you off, I mean, all you can say to yourself is, my heartfelt goal was to check in and just listen. You don't have an agenda. You don't know what's going on. You haven't talked to her in a couple years. So, just if nothing else, if you're not uncomfortable making the call, then I would say make it. So your choices are, don't do anything, make the call and listen. And the third thing is maybe sit with your daughter and let her understand how you're feeling about it. And then maybe she will retract her request. Maybe she'll say, you know what, Dad, I think you really need to reach out, which is one of the options. So you've got 3 different options to go to. That's my thought.
And I figured by telling you, I'm sure you have people out there in your life that you've helped numerous times that you already at least think in your mind, if you help them one more time, it's not going to make a difference, or the next time. But I guess the theory is you don't know when the help arrives. You don't know when the person's ready unless you ask.
Well, and when it comes to, let's call it mental health or behavioral health, or it comes to, because there's different issues with somebody who's self-medicating. I mean, I literally just talked to someone the other day who completely didn't even remember talking to me. I mean, like I don't remember everything I do, but I keep notes, especially in voicemails with texting. And I know I spoke to this person before, and she said, hey, my son's going to get out of jail on Friday. And these calls, by the way, they never come Monday through Thursday, 9 to 5. They're always Friday afternoon, early evening. They're always late Saturday night or Sunday, because that's kind of when family tends to, stir up the pot. And I reached back out, said, let's talk tomorrow. And they called me. I called them back. They haven't called back. Friday's coming, and this kid's going to be getting out. And, the mother said, hey, not the mother, the grandmother, who's helping because the mother isn't really in a position to help the grandson. I know I'm going to get a phone call probably tomorrow night. He's getting out tomorrow. What am I supposed to do? And here it is, Wednesday. So I can only be a resource to them because I don't know where the kid's head's at, and I haven't spoken to him as well. So, and I know families I've talked to 5, 6, 7 years. They'll call me, and I've sometimes I have to put a very strong boundary around them and say, look, I'm happy to help, but at the end of the day, I can't fix them. You can't fix them. And your worrying about this child is making you ill, and pressure bust pipes. So I'm not suggesting a parent ever abandon a child, but I hear it a lot. People, if I could figure out a way for someone to pay me a premium to go pick up a kid and take them somewhere, I could make a fortune doing that. But I don't think that's what works. And I don't think that's what families really want. They just get frustrated. I'm talking about
it definitely doesn't work, because I have it in my notes to bring this up, because I have a friend, a girl that I know who's a very good mother, but she had a daughter that was going through some major mental health issues at one point.
Right.
And I mean, stuff most parents would just give up. It was just crazy stuff, violence, all the stuff. Well, she never did give up. And this week, that child graduates from high school, and she just received the award for most improved student from beginning to senior year. And what it showed me was giving up doesn't solve the problem. Right. But if you keep fighting through it, your problem probably has a better percentage chance of straightening itself out.
And not giving up or giving up are two different sides of the spectrum, meaning you can put the relationship kind of in neutral. So you're really not worrying about it because worrying hasn't helped. You can, compartmentalize it, if you will, or talk to somebody about it so you can manage those feelings of angst. But at the end of the day, there are some people that no matter what you do, no matter what I do, what I've seen, you may not have the timing may not be right for them to be ready, and intervening on that sometimes can make things worse. So, it depends on the circumstance, depends on the history, and it depends on the issue. I mean, when it comes to self-medication, it's one thing. You remove the anesthesia, you can work on the mental health issues. But if you've got a mental health situation going on where someone's really impaired, but they're not self-medicating, that's a whole different scenario. And if someone truly has a deeply rooted mental health issue that's going untreated, whatever the trigger might have been that caused it, talking them through it sometimes is not enough, because they need a higher level of care. I mean, that's how the term institution got created. People need to be institutionalized for a period of time so they can really be monitored and get things stabilized so they can be coached and they can kind of relearn. Imagine it's somebody who, for example, has a stroke and has forgotten how to walk. I mean, they can learn to walk again. There are skill sets if they're capable of doing it. And sometimes the stroke is so bad, they won't be able to do that. But there are different variables that come into place that can, potentially contribute to an option of someone returning to as high a level of normalcy as possible. That's why you always hear me talk about hope and help. And I never, I like to believe I never give up on anybody, but sometimes you have to let it go, so to speak. You just can't actively try to change somebody's mind when their mind is not changeable. I tell families that who have someone who's under the influence, do not talk to somebody who's under the influence. They're not going to hear you. and their brain's not working effectively. I just had this conversation yesterday with somebody who has a significant other who's 51 years old, and they're not getting it, and they want some help. They reached out to me. We talked. We'll see what happens. But I've also learned that sometimes by me trying to do more than I should initially can actually interrupt the behavior that if you're able to kind of sit back and hold your not hold your breath, but just breathe through it, they may come around and be a lot more receptive. And that's something that no one can really judge. And we as a world I've talked about this probably every week more than anything with COVID. People's level of severity of whatever was going on in many cases have gotten worse because they couldn't manage them the way they were before, or they stopped taking their medication, or some people increased their self-medication. So we're seeing an interesting group of individuals now that are coming out of this thing. And I think we're a week away. California going to be opening pretty much everything up, and you see the violence going on in airlines right now with the mask thing, and some of the we just, I don't know where this came from, but we had 8 head-on collisions in our community lately, and one was a woman who turned out was on diabetic, didn't take her insulin, kind of probably was just wasn't completely impaired, and actually killed 2 detectives in our community. It was completely accidental, but it was weird. 8 head-on collisions in our community within like a 3-day period, and the others were impaired to some degree. We haven't heard the details yet, so we're going to see, unfortunately, more issues that need to be addressed than we ever have before, I think, coming out of this. Plus, look at the dissension we have in this country right now. Just taking the position of who thinks who's right and why we're doing this and how we're doing that. It's interesting. The word I want to use is scary, because I think it's not just interesting, it's scary.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting, though, that even though we don't have any, all I do is make some notes and stuff, but something you say always coincides with something I wrote down. And you had mentioned mental health and addiction being 2 different entities in themselves. So right now in New Hampshire, they're struggling. I read it in the Washington Post this morning that they're trying to pass a rule or a law, and it unfortunately didn't get passed because they're running out of bed space for mental health issues, because they're being filled with people with drug addiction who are being misdiagnosed as having mental health issues. But then those people with real mental health issues are sitting in an ER in the hallway on a gurney for 2-3 days waiting for a room because somebody, and they say some of them aren't even addicts. They're just high on something or drunk or whatever. It doesn't, just because you're drunk doesn't mean you're an addict. But they're having trouble coming up with the bed space, and they can't figure out. They want to do a 72-hour mandatory, and they don't have that in New Hampshire. Everything's voluntary.
Right. Well, we have that in California, and there are people who believe that that's not enough. I'm one of them. I mean, if somebody comes in, who's in a drunken blackout and is going to harm themselves or others, 72 hours is not enough time. You can give somebody a shower and food and let them sleep it off, but when they wake up, that's the time that they're potentially, in my opinion, it's a teachable moment. So I get that understanding about the difference between mental health issues and someone who's self-medicating, if you will, because there's a judgment thing, hence the end of the stigma, just because there's a difference. But the way you treat somebody who is, let's say, bipolar and having a major episode, or who's depressed and is suicidal, you treat them a lot differently than you would somebody who's under the influence of something mood altering, whether it's a prescription medication, alcohol, or a street drug. The way you treat it's differently. And people who have a primary diagnosis of addiction or self-medication, until you remove that anesthesia and they get sober or clean for that moment or two, you can't even do a dive on assessing what the mental health issues are. So, and it's interesting. I just heard the other day, to your point, a major facility. I can't remember exactly where it was in the South, I believe. They ended up just closing their doors because the line out the front was so long. They didn't have enough resources to be able to handle the clients of need. So they had, because they couldn't do that, they couldn't pay the staff, so they had to close their doors. There was actually a heroin clinic back east, northeast somewhere. I think it was almost 2 years ago. Same thing happened to both of those facilities. They were county funded, getting X amount of money a year. They had X amount of staff, but they were so busy around the clock, they ended up running out of money. And you can't expect, trained professionals to work for free, maybe for a week or 2 or 3. But what happened was, because they were out of money, they had to close their doors. Now, those facilities have not, from I understand, not been reopened. And because these were people that were subsidized through county money, no private provider is going to come in if they can't get paid for the fees for services that they render. It's a really difficult situation. And, our mental health beds in our community, we don't have enough. And, there's a group in San Diego called PERT, Psychiatric Emergency Response Team. And most communities have something like that. Ours is very sophisticated because it's been going on for a long time. Sophisticated because they've made some, really strong inroads. Really what it is a sworn officer with a clinician, and they're paired together and they go out to these calls. So here's the fact around it. 10 years ago, the average PERT call, they would go out, they talk to a family. A lot of it was domestic violence, and they didn't really want to just arrest somebody. They wanted to find out what was going on and see if they could direct them to the highest level of care. 9 out of 10 of the calls 10 years ago, the primary issue was alcohol or some other mood altering substance. Now, just 10 years later, and I've talked to the people that have been running it for decades, just 10 years later, 9 out of 10 of the calls are primary mental health, not alcohol. So when you get to a situation like that, when someone's drinking, you put them in a bed and you give them a Valium, they go to sleep. But if somebody's having a mental health episode, you can't really diagnose them if they're not coherent enough to even talk to you about what's going on. So that's the kind of paradigm shift we've had just in a short period of time, just in our community. And I think we're pretty much representative of what's going on around the country, in some cases, the world.
Yeah. And personally, I don't see it very often in the area I live. I'm in a small town, but it's here. You just I don't know what the difference is between small towns, that whether they hide it better or they're just people with money that could be in their house. And I don't know. We don't hear much about it. It's not
it's the volume is what it comes down to. I mean, if you take a percentage of your community, let's just say it's 1% of a community with 300,000, the volume of people of need is different than the 1% of a community like ours, which is 3.3 million people. So it's just that volume that takes place. And and think about this: if 10 years ago 1% of the community had an issue, and now it's grown 3 and 4 or 5 times because people just aren't getting the level of care or support that they need or want, or aren't willing to go, or can't afford it, or the stigma has prevented them from putting their hand up saying, I need help. Now all of a sudden that same problem has really started to grow, and most communities can't get up to speed quick enough to meet that demand. And then you factor in PTSD. You factor in this last year with increased domestic violence, child abuse because of COVID, kids not being in school, places they can't vent, young people addicted to the internet. We now have, it's funny. I've never liked the zombie movies. And, they're everywhere. And it's like almost like they knew one day we'd get there. And that's what it's like in some cases. You got people moving around the community that are so disoriented. And then if you look at the homeless population, it's up almost 30% in a community like ours that supposedly knows what we're doing to deal with it. And every major metropolitan community in this country has a homeless issue. I mean, California's got one of the worst because we have half the homeless, but summer's here now and more people will be outside. And they just did a big raid on Venice Beach with law enforcement. Not really a raid. They put signs up and says, hey, you can't stay here anymore. Well, they didn't just put on a plane and send them to Nevada. They just pushed them away, and they got relocated. They're not going away. They're just someplace else. Right. They'll set up camp, and wherever they ending up, they'll probably come back because the beach is really hard to patrol by anybody. Then you've got the sand and the wall and the water. You can go out and come back in. And at night, it's not a heavily patrolled area. But the people that live in Venice are just saying, we can't let our kids out anymore. There's a couple interviewed that have grandkids, and they go, we don't even go to the beach anymore. We don't go out of our condo unless it's to go to the grocery store. And that's kind of a sad state of affairs. But it's one of those things that if we don't manage it, it's going to get worse.
So speaking of some homeless situations and stuff, I saw, first of all, down in Tampa, it's rampant. Yeah, I mean, there was homeless people everywhere.
What were you seeing? Were you seeing tents next to each other, connected, and that kind of thing?
Some tents, a lot of panhandling, a lot of walking through a parking lot. Hey, buddy, you got $1? You know, stuff like that. And it sounds horrible. I wish I could give money to people and just solve their problem, but that doesn't solve their problem usually. But when you grow up where I am on the East Coast, between New York and Boston, you become a little less compassionate, and I guess is the word, and you a little hardened. You're kind of used to it. You're taught, just keep walking, mind your own business, stuff like that. A lot of mind your business, which doesn't solve any of the problem. It just passes the problem. Similar to what you just said. The cops, all they did was move the problem from Venice Beach to the next block, or 2 blocks over. And now it's somebody else's jurisdiction and it's their problem. That's what they're doing. They're just passing the buck.
Let me interrupt you, because I do know, listen to the interview of the sheriff that was in charge, because I know when they make these sweeps, they come out with access to beds, detox, some housing first concept thinking, and they come with these resources because they're not, in California, the cops usually get sued all the time. They take someone's shopping cart, and then a lawyer would step up, take a public defender, and take it on a contingency, and they go sue the police department, the city, and say this person had $15,000 worth of valuables in their shopping cart, and your sworn officers confiscated it. It's like, what? They were using the cart as a weapon to run people down the sidewalk because they were upset that someone came into their tent and stole one of their 40-ounce beers. So my point is, they come with these resources, but if they have 50 beds available and they're moving 400, 500 people around who all have the same needs, housing, want a job, need a job, maybe have a mental health issue, potentially an addiction issue, and they don't want to, because they know they're not going to go into a structured environment where they can't use and drink anymore. And if they're too sick emotionally or mentally, they're not about to go into a structured environment because for them it's uncomfortable and they don't want to be told what to do. I mean, I understand that. So law enforcement can only do so much. That's why I remember 30 years ago, we used to hear that story. Law enforcement used to say, homelessness is not a law enforcement problem, and it's not. They're the enforcer. So it is interesting too, because now, I mean, I'm waiting for some homeless group to create. I was talking to a buddy of mine, Chris. I think he just popped up about creating a union, a homeless union, because I'm amazed no one's done it, but probably nobody wants to pay their dues to keep a union going because it's gotten so bad in LA and San Francisco and California. I mean, in San Diego, the whole state, half the homeless are in the country supposedly are residing in California right now. And that is scary because it doesn't matter how much money you throw at it. Because if you throw money at it and the word gets out, hey, there's more shelter beds, homeless people living in very uncomfortable physical climates like freezing cold temperatures in big cities back east, there's social workers going, hey, here's a Greyhound bus ticket. It's 65 degrees in San Diego. You can live anywhere, and they get on the bus and go. And they're not leaving. They're not going back, not on their own.
One of the things I've seen recently is a meme that kind of touched me. It showed a picture of the unknown soldier, and it had armed forces around it and, flowers and all this stuff and dedications. And then it showed a picture of the known soldier, and it's a homeless guy on the street, alive, yet he's surrounded by nothing. What is there a solution to? I know everything's got to be done in baby steps, and you can't just blanket solve it. Wouldn't it make sense to start with our military personnel, or is that just?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because in theory, veterans have access to insurance. But let me tell you something interesting. Here in San Diego, we have 270,000 veterans, okay? And according to the experts, those who have been in the industry of working with veterans who are veterans, it was just shared with me last year that of the 270,000 veterans, that reside in San Diego, half of them, 135,000, don't even have insurance. And most of them are going to be eligible unless something happened with some sort of a dishonorable discharge, or, I don't know, some criminal history, or, they acted out inappropriately in some facility, whatever it might be. But most of them, probably 80%, are eligible for insurance. So not being able to work with veterans, it just seems a shame, because when you think about the VA, the Veterans Administration, they have the second largest budget in the country, $280 billion. But when it comes to behavioral health, it's very opaque. You never know if you're going to have to deal with somebody for a week, a weekend, forever, and until those assessments are being done. And right now, I believe the number is, used to be 40% of the homeless in our community were veterans. And I've been told by the bean counters, it's dropped to 29%. So what happened to the other 11%? Did they expire? Did they move on? Or are they no longer standing around to be counted? So yeah, veterans would be a great place, because the VA has the kind of infrastructure, not necessarily housing, but the mental health side, the medical side, the assessment side, the capacity to be able to deal with that individual. And, a lot of people in military or veterans who are coming out of the military, they suffer from untreated trauma and PTSD. And those things you can't give somebody a pill for, or spend a weekend in a seminar. It takes a lot of time to really process that kind of, impairment.
And I bet once you're in the military, I never was, but once you're in the military, it must give you some kind of a tough guy, tough woman, persona. So it probably takes years for you to even admit you have a problem, because you're taught, just suck it up, fight, go. So,
yeah,
and they're too proud. I bet you there's homeless people on the street that are too proud to take help, because they're military guys.
Well, and a lot of street people have a lot of resilience and survival skills as well, and that's part of the stigma. Nobody wants a handout. No, some people do, but it's only short term, because most people would rather. I've met thousands of homeless people over the years. Most people would love a job, love to generate their own income, have a key to their own place, and the communities have tried a variety of different ways to remedy that. And so far, because it's such a large scale problem right now, it's not, I did you ever see that 40-minute rant that I did about the homeless issues?
Yeah, with the video I think you showed me a video.
Well, I was interviewed it was literally a 40-minute piece, and I was, kind of down on a few different things. And I ran a nonprofit for 18 years. So I kind of have an idea of what I think works, and it worked for us. We had it studied. You give someone a place to live. You need an address to get a job. You need a job to keep an address. You put the wraparound services there. You give them support, case management, and help them develop the life skills that they really need, because they can't do it on their own, and maybe go back to school. So there is solutions to it, and I'm sure there are many places across the country that have been able to focus and get, thought leaders and legislative leaders and politicians involved. And there's got to be a will to do that. And if there isn't, it doesn't matter what you do with it. It continues to grow. And, we're in a community where I think we have political will, and where there are people that don't want to see homeless, but we're not making inroads, in my opinion, that are significant enough. We're not creating systemic change. And by the more shelter beds you have, people come into shelters, they leave in the morning and they do their thing and come back at night. And no one's really testing them to see if they're under the influence. And if they are, they have to find a bed for them to go to treatment. And that's the toughest customer. They have nothing else to lose, and they don't want the structure, and they don't want to be told what to do. And I get that. Some of it's false pride, some of it's ego, some of it's the disease itself, some of it's the stigma. But, I'm a firm believer there's hope and help. But, when you're talking about Los Angeles, 60,000 homeless people in a city of 7 million, and probably the 60,000 are probably compacted to maybe 8 or 9 square miles of the whole community. So it's really, really hard. And you'd think it'd be easier, because it's not like you have to go looking for them. They're right there.
I think one of the reasons I don't see it as often, first of all, living in a small, wealthy area is one thing. New Haven is only 2 towns over, so there is homeless problem there. But being so close to New York City, I think a lot of them end up going there from Connecticut.
Well, the services are there. The
Right.
feeding lines, the faith-based groups, the handouts, the welfare. And you can move around in a big city and almost get lost, if you will, for short periods of time. I remember they were, had years ago, they were talking about living in the subways and little towns underneath the ground. But it does get very cold in New York certain times of the year. But bigger cities are a lot easier, in my opinion, for homeless. Plus, you go to a rural area and you're panhandling in a town where everybody knows everybody. All they have to do is go, don't give him any money or her any money, and they'll just move on. And in many cases they will, because if they can't survive and they're not couch surfing and don't have family there, they're going to move on. And they know where to go. I mean, the megaphone on the street's pretty big, and they communicate really well. They also know. And if they get arrested, they go inside, 3 hots and a cot, and they're talking to other people. They get new tips and tricks. Come back out with some new solutions for people.
Where I used to see it a lot, when I used to take the train into New York daily, that's where I saw all the tent cities on the train track sides in the woods. Right. You would just see a blue tent all of a sudden in the middle of nowhere. And I don't know where those roads led to or how to get back there, but I would guess they're pretty deep in, and you could only see them from the train. So
we have major intersections where people sit with signs all day long on red lights, and they go to the busiest intersections in town, and it's kind of like their turf. You see them fighting sometimes because somebody crosses the street and goes, no, this is where I work. Oh, okay.
So before we wrap this up or start to wrap this up, so Connecticut just passed through the Senate legalization of marijuana legalization. Now it's supposed to go to the House right now. They're supposed to be voting on it in the House. And I have friends that are involved in the future of growth and stuff. They want their Connecticut grow license and all that. So I was reading some of the numbers that are involved. What big business this is from the state is going to make so much money initially off it. And I understand there's also it looks great when there's money coming in. It's like casinos and stuff. People forget about the negatives that happen with it. And there are a few people arguing in my friends groups. I've got friends that enjoy recreational marijuana. I got friends that are dead set against it. I happen to not be one of these people. I never did enjoy it, never liked it. And it looks like it's going to cost $70,000 just to apply for a license to be a grower with no guarantee, and you don't get refunded on that money back. So is this just going to be 10,000 people throwing up 70 grand and hoping they get picked, or is it still going to be the big guys going to get it?
Well, like any business, because generally speaking, they're only going to put out a handful because they want to. The thinking is, well, we'll control this industry by limiting the amount of, licenses we give out for people to grow and licenses for people to distribute and permits to give to, different delivery services to deliver. And it'll be a handful. But, a lot of those people are getting money from some of the national people who will take a percentage of their business and they'll front the money. And, Goldman Sachs, I'm sure, has investors. I'm sure they have investors that are in the marijuana industry in a big way. And, the model that they're following is the tobacco industry. And most people couldn't get into the tobacco industry because it was so restrictive and they had so much control. Where the marijuana industry, most people, unless you have a criminal history, can apply. And maybe they don't have the 10 grand, but and I'm sure there's things on the dark web where you can go and borrow money, if nothing else, with a bank, because right now the return on investment for the marijuana industry is huge. And it's like, how are you going to fail? The only way you're going to fail is if the illegal distributors are undercutting you by so much and it's so plentiful. There you're going to be your competition, because that business, by the way, is growing. And my biggest concern about all of this is the THC is 97% pure. And we're going to see young people, their brains are going to stop developing. And we're going to talk about zombies. In 10 more years, we're going to have potentially a generation who, is addicted to marijuana. And, we're seeing fentanyl in marijuana here in Southern California. So it's popping up everywhere. So that's my big concern about, my big thing is just get informed. You're going to do something to your body, mind, and soul. Try to think it through before you make that decision. And if you're not sure, get sure.
What is, but since you've seen both sides of the fence, if, hypothetically, if your child was to have a problem, and you got to choose that problem out of one or the two, would you choose alcoholism or a marijuana smoker?
Well, if my child was compulsively and obsessively doing either one of those things and I saw that they were deteriorating, I would intervene on that behavior the best I could and then get the highest and best level of care that I could to help them. And as a crisis coach, that's what I do with families, is try to intervene and help educate the family. Because if the child is under the influence and that influencer, if you will, is taking away from their quality of life, okay, then you are on a track of nothing but negative outcomes over time. Meaning when someone says, I smoke marijuana and everything is great, episodically it might be, but over time, according to all the science, once you get addicted and you want to get higher, you're going to need more to do it. And a lot of people will add things to that menu, not even talking about the gateway side of it. But if this feels good, as somebody who's a recovering addict and alcoholic, if this feels good and someone says that's going to make me feel better, I'm more than likely going to try it.
All right. And probably get hooked. So
more than likely.
So let's talk about your book real quick. It's still available up on Amazon and other places also, correct?
Well, if you don't see it there, go into your favorite bookstore and ask for it, because they're going to want to see what the customer wants in their inventory. So right now on Amazon, you can go to yourcrisiscoach.com. I have them on my website. I have a couple hundred copies here at home. I'm happy to sign and send it to you. And if you need help or you want to talk, 619-993-2738, 619-993-2738. Give me a call, text me, let's chat.
Yeah, and the opioid epidemic is doing well. It's on Amazon. You could find it there. Make sure you're checking everything out. And it's a good book. Mine is on the way, I hear. Is that true? I heard my book is on the way to my house.
Who told you that?
You. Okay, you asked for my address.
Then it's coming, brother. As a matter of fact, it should be landing. I got a few people let me know today that it takes about 7 days because I send it media mail, which I know you'll appreciate it because it's the least expensive way to mail a book.
Oh, I'm aware, and so which is great. That's a great
as a published author, So it should be getting to you this week. If it doesn't, let me know.
Yeah, media mail. That is one of the positives to the U.S. Post Office because they appreciate not charging people to send books via mail because of learning reasons and stuff. So right. Also my magazine, this is my magazine that came out this last week, Apostrophes, and that's for indie authors and indie podcasters, which we are. I fit into both of them. You fit into both of them now. And it's doing well. It's doing much better than I assumed it to from a startup. Mm-hmm. I ended up with 100 subscriptions in the first month. That's just random people going to my website and signing up. So that's what you got to do. If you want to be a part of it, it's always free. This is a free magazine. It's written by podcasters and authors. All the articles, they're how-to articles on marketing, but it's intended for readers, writers, podcasters, and listeners. So there's a little of something for everyone. There's advertisements in it. All the advertisements are clickable, where you just hit it with your finger and it takes you right to that book and stuff. Scott's book's in next issue, and it's doing well. So I'm very proud of it. It was a lot of work getting it up and started. It's a lot of layout. I don't have editorial layout design work. So, and I'm not great at Photoshop. Like this is a Photoshop cover that I did, and people liked the cover. They said it came out good. They like the way it looks, and it draws them in. So I'm very proud of that, and it feels good to add to the community. So if they go to Venom Studios, that's VenomStudioz, Z, not S, Z.com, it'll pop up right away asking you to sign up for apostrophes. And also, if you want to buy anything from the swag shop there, any of the shirts or the mugs for Ending the Stigma or any of my other shows, I pay for shipping if you sign up for the magazine. So that's another freebie.
There you go.
That's
our second favorite F word, free.
But okay, Scott. So I think that's going to do it. Once again, we had a very successful conversation. So I want to thank you for joining in, and thank everybody that listened for Ending the Stigma, A Path to Recovery. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Castbox right now. Still waiting on 3 other, Pandora and a few others, but it's growing on audio version of it. So I'm very happy to say that. And it's very good to do. Oh, Andrea just chimed in. Let's see what Nice magazine. Nice magazine. Thanks, Andrea. Andrea had a lot to do with it too. She worked on it. So make sure everybody's going to Apple or wherever you listen to your podcasting. If you need us to get onto something else, let me know about it. Maybe it's something I'm unaware of. I also do an Ending the Stigma pre-show every Wednesday on Castbox Live from 6 to 6:15, where I just let the lines be open and chat with people. And that's going to be it. So nice talking to you, Scott.
Good seeing you, Fredd.
And we will talk again soon. Goodbye, everyone.